I didn't write this song to be heard, I wrote it because I was falling apart. This song came from a moment when love stopped saving me and started destroying me.
Too much love will kill you if you can't make up your mind.
This song was never meant for the world. It wasn't written for an album. It wasn't written for radio. And it definitely wasn't written with an audience in mind. Brian May wrote it in silence. During a period of his life he didn't talk about publicly and for a long time, didn't want anyone to know existed at all. The words came out slowly, almost reluctantly, not as poetry, but as confession. Line by line, they reflected a truth Brian was struggling to face himself. Because this wasn't a song about romance. It was a song about damage. About what happens when love stops being something that saves you and starts becoming something that pulls you apart from the inside. For years, Brian kept this song hidden, not because it wasn't good enough, but because it was too honest, too close, too dangerous. Even within Queen, this song existed in a strange limbo, known but untouched, written but unreleased. And when it finally emerged years later, it carried a weight far heavier than the moment it was written. To understand why Too Much Love Will Kill You exists and why it sounds the way it does, you have to go back to the moment Brian's life quietly split in two. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Freddie Mercury and Queen and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel, like, and share. From the outside, Brian May's life looks stable. He was successful, respected, married, and part of one of the biggest bands in the world. There was no public scandal, no chaos visible to fans. Everything appeared balanced. But privately, something was breaking. Brian later admitted that this period of his life felt like living in parallel worlds. One was public, functional, predictable. The other was emotional, confusing, and filled with decisions he never imagined he would face. He wasn't unhappy in a dramatic sense. That's what made it harder. There was no single moment of collapse, no obvious villain, just a growing sense that something was deeply misaligned and that pretending otherwise was slowly destroying him. This internal conflict became exhausting. Maintaining appearances, managing expectations, trying to be fair to everyone involved while quietly failing all of them, including himself. Brian has described this time as emotionally paralyzing. Every decision felt wrong, every option carried consequences, and doing nothing felt just as damaging as acting. That pressure didn't explode outward. It turned inward. And when Brian couldn't articulate what he was feeling to the people around him, he did the one thing he had always done instinctively. He wrote, but what came out wasn't a love song. It was a warning. The most painful part of this story isn't betrayal. It's confusion. Brian didn't wake up one day intending to hurt anyone. The relationship that would later define this song didn't begin as a rebellion or an escape. It began as connection, emotional, intense, and deeply human. And that's what made it dangerous. Brian found himself emotionally tied to two worlds at once, trying to honor commitments while being pulled towards something that felt equally real. There was no clean break, no easy decision, only guilt. Every moment of closeness carried the weight of someone else being hurt. Every attempt to step back felt dishonest to someone else's feelings. Brian later spoke about how this created a constant state of anxiety, not fear of being discovered, but fear of becoming someone he didn't recognize. This wasn't passion, it was pressure. And slowly, love stopped feeling like relief. It started to feel like responsibility stacked on top of responsibility until the emotional load became unbearable. That's when the song began to form, not as melody first, but as a realization that sometimes, even when intentions aren't cruel, the outcome still is. And that love, without balance, doesn't heal. It destroys. The most unsettling line in the song wasn't written to sound dramatic. It was written because it felt true. Too much love will kill you. Brian wasn't talking about obsession in the romantic sense. He was describing something quieter and more suffocating, the kind of love that demands more than you can give, while offering no way out without pain. At this point, the song stopped being abstract. It became personal. Brian began writing as if he were documenting a psychological state. The lyrics weren't exaggerated. If anything, they were restrained. Short sentences, clear thoughts, no metaphors to soften the impact. That restraint is what makes the song unsettling. There's no blame, no accusation, just exhaustion. The feeling of being pulled in opposite directions until something inside you begins to crack. Brian has said that writing this song didn't bring relief. It brought clarity, and clarity hurt. Because once the truth was on paper, it couldn't be ignored anymore. That's why he didn't rush to share it. This wasn't a song that could be casually played for bandmates. It wasn't something to workshop or polish for release. It was a mirror. And looking into it meant accepting what he had become and what his choices were doing to everyone involved. Which is why when someone else finally heard the song, the reaction was immediate and telling. By the time the song was fully written, Brian knew something was different. This wasn't a draft. It wasn't a rough idea waiting to be shaped. The song arrived complete, emotionally finished, even if it wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. That realization frightened him. Most songs benefit from distance. You revise them, soften the edges, adjust the language. But Too Much Love Will Kill You didn't allow that. Every attempt to polish it felt dishonest. The song resisted improvement because it wasn't trying to be beautiful. It was trying to be accurate. Brian treated it like a private journal entry, something you write to survive the moment, not to share with the world. He understood immediately that releasing it would mean exposing a part of his life he wasn't ready to explain to fans, to the band, or to himself. So he hid it. The song existed quietly in the background, acknowledged but untouched. It wasn't rejected for quality. It was rejected for proximity. It was too close to the truth. And sometimes, the hardest art to release is the art that doesn't lie. Brian continued working, touring, creating, but this song remained frozen in time, attached to a period he couldn't revisit without reopening wounds. Until someone else heard it. And that moment changed everything. When Freddie Mercury heard Too Much Love Will Kill You, there was no dramatic reaction, no critique, no suggestion. No attempt to reshape it. He understood it instantly. Freddie had an instinct for emotional truth. He knew when a song wasn't asking to be improved, only respected. And this one carried a weight that didn't need commentary. According to Brian, Freddie recognized what the song was without being told. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He simply acknowledged it. That silence mattered. Freddie knew what it meant to live with internal conflict, to carry something heavy without giving it a public name, and he understood why this song couldn't be treated like a normal Queen track. It wasn't meant for performance. It wasn't meant for spectacle. It was meant to exist. And that mutual understanding is why the song stayed where it was. If this moment is landing with you, this is where I invite you to stay with the channel. These aren't just stories about music, they're about the moments artists choose honesty over comfort. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Like the video if this song feels heavier now. And tell me in the comments, do you hear pain in this song or clarity? Because the song's meaning would soon deepen in ways no one expected. When Freddie passed away, everything about the song changed. What had once been a private confession became something else entirely. The words didn't move, but their gravity did. Suddenly, lines about love, pressure, and inner collapse echoed against a new silence. Brian didn't rush to release the song. He hesitated, because now the music carried two stories at once, his own struggle and the absence of the person who had understood it without explanation. The song no longer felt like a snapshot of a painful chapter. It felt like a reflection of loss, not just romantic loss, but emotional companionship. When Too Much Love Will Kill You was finally released, it wasn't presented as a revelation. It arrived quietly, almost cautiously, as if Brian still wasn't sure the world was ready for it. And maybe it wasn't. But the truth rarely arrives at a convenient time. The song's tragedy wasn't just in what it described, but in when it was finally heard. And that timing ensured it would never be listened to the same way again. The title of the song isn't poetic. It's literal. Too Much Love Will Kill You isn't a metaphor about romance gone wrong. It's a statement about emotional overload, about what happens when care turns into pressure and connection turns into collapse. Brian wasn't blaming love itself. He was describing imbalance. Trying to be everything to everyone, carrying responsibility without resolution, staying silent because every option feels destructive in its own way. That's why the line hurts. There's no villain in the story, no dramatic betrayal, just human limitation. Brian later reflected that the song came from a moment when love stopped feeling like choice and started feeling like obligation, when emotions stacked up faster than they could be processed. And that's what makes the song uncomfortable. It doesn't offer escape. It doesn't offer redemption. It offers recognition. Most people hear the song as sad, Some hear it as romantic, but at its core, it's a warning about ignoring emotional boundaries until the damage becomes unavoidable. That honesty is rare, and it's why the song still feels unsettling, even decades later. Queen wrote many emotional songs, but this one doesn't perform emotion, it documents it. There's no theatrical framing, no larger-than-life persona, just a man admitting that love, something we're taught to celebrate without limits, can also become destructive when it's unbalanced. Brian never tried to turn this song into an anthem. He never dressed it up with grandeur. The arrangement stays restrained because the message doesn't need amplification. That restraint is intentional. This is one of the few Queen songs where the music steps back and lets the truth speak first. And that's why it stands apart. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't soften. It doesn't pretend everything will be fine. It ends where it begins, with awareness. That's also why Freddie understood it instantly. He recognized honesty when he heard it, not the kind that demands sympathy, the kind that simply exists. This song wasn't written to impress. It was written to survive. And that might be the bravest thing Brian May ever put to music. Too Much Love Will Kill You isn't a love song. It's a boundary. Brian May didn't write it to explain himself to the world. He wrote it because the truth needed somewhere to exist. And for years, that truth stayed hidden, not out of shame, but out of care. When the song finally reached the public, it carried more than melody. It carried a lesson most people only learn too late. That love without limits isn't always kind. That silence doesn't prevent damage, it delays it. And that honesty, even when painful, is sometimes the only way forward. This song doesn't ask you to feel sorry for anyone. It asks you to listen. And once you do, you realize something quietly devastating. The tragedy behind this song isn't what happened. It's what almost did.